For a brief moment, it looked like the war might finally be winding down. Diplomats spoke about progress, international leaders talked about ceasefires, negotiators traveled between capitals, headlines focused on agreements, humanitarian access, and hopes for de-escalation. Around the world, many people assumed the worst phase of the conflict had passed. After months of destruction, displacement, and international pressure, there was a growing belief that Gaza might finally be moving toward a period of recovery. But the war never really ended. In fact, according to many observers, one of the biggest misconceptions surrounding the conflict is the idea that it ever truly stopped at all. Because while international attention shifted elsewhere, fighting continued, airstrikes continued, military operations continued, civilians continued fleeing. Humanitarian agencies continued warning about worsening conditions. And for the people living inside Gaza, the reality remained painfully clear. The war everyone thought was ending was still happening. One reason this perception emerged is because modern conflicts often disappear from headlines before they disappear from reality. Public attention moves quickly, new crises emerge, different regions dominate the news cycle. Yet wars frequently continue long after international audiences stop following daily developments. Gaza became a powerful example of this phenomenon. At various points, negotiations created hopes for lasting ceasefires. Temporary pauses reduced violence in some areas. Aid deliveries increased periodically. Political leaders described progress. Each development generated optimism that a broader settlement might be possible. Yet on the ground, conditions remained unstable. Military operations never fully disappeared. Armed groups remained active. Security concerns remained unresolved, and both sides continued preparing for the possibility of renewed escalation. That combination created a fragile environment where periods of relative calm could quickly give way to new violence. For civilians, the distinction between a formal ceasefire and a genuine peace often means very little. What matters is safety. Can families return home? Can children attend school? Can hospitals function? Can food and medicine reach communities? Can people sleep without fear of explosions? For many residents of Gaza, those questions remained unanswered, even during periods when international headlines suggested progress. The humanitarian situation continued dominating concerns. Large sections of infrastructure suffered extensive damage. Housing shortages affected countless families. Access to healthcare remained difficult. Water and electricity systems faced enormous strain. Humanitarian organizations repeatedly warned that recovery would require years of sustained effort, even if fighting stopped completely. And that was the problem. Fighting never completely stopped. Every new incident carried the potential to trigger broader escalation. A strike, a rocket launch, a military operation, a security incident. Each could rapidly undo weeks of diplomatic progress. This pattern frustrated negotiators repeatedly. Temporary agreements created opportunities for improvement, yet those opportunities often proved fragile. Trust remained limited, political divisions remained deep, and the underlying issues driving the conflict remained unresolved. That reality helps explain why declarations that the war was over often proved premature. Conflicts rarely end simply because people want them to. They end when political, military, and security conditions align in ways that allow durable agreements to emerge. In Gaza, that alignment remained elusive. The international dimension added further complexity. Regional powers pursued different objectives. Global powers maintained different priorities. Humanitarian organizations focused on civilian needs. Military planners focused on security concerns. Diplomats focused on negotiations. Each perspective emphasized different aspects of the crisis. As a result, public narratives often became fragmented. Some observers focused on ceasefire efforts. Others focused on continuing violence. Both were often correct simultaneously. That apparent contradiction confused many people. How can a conflict be moving toward peace while violence continues? Because in modern warfare, transitions are rarely clean. Wars often fade unevenly rather than ending suddenly. Some areas experience improvement while others remain dangerous. Some indicators move in positive directions while others deteriorate. The result is a gray zone between war and peace. Gaza has spent much of its recent history inside that gray zone. For civilians, living in such conditions creates enormous uncertainty. Planning for the future becomes difficult. Businesses hesitate to invest. Families hesitate to rebuild. Communities hesitate to return to normal routines. No one knows whether calm will last. No one knows whether violence will return. That uncertainty becomes a burden in itself. Children grow up surrounded by instability. Parents make decisions under constant pressure. Healthcare workers, teachers, and aid organizations operate without knowing what conditions will look like next month. The economic consequences are equally severe. Conflict disrupts commerce, damages infrastructure, reduces investment, increases costs, and limits opportunities for growth. Even when violence decreases temporarily, economic recovery often remains slow because uncertainty discourages long-term planning. This is why humanitarian agencies repeatedly emphasize that recovery requires more than pauses and fighting. It requires stability, predictability, security, and time. Without those elements, reconstruction becomes extraordinarily difficult. Another challenge involves expectations. When leaders announce ceasefires or diplomatic progress, public optimism naturally rises. People hope conditions will improve quickly. When improvements fail to materialize, frustration follows. That cycle has repeated itself numerous times. Hope rises, violence declines briefly, problems persist, violence returns, hope declines again. Breaking that cycle is one of the greatest challenges facing negotiators. Meanwhile, international attention continues fluctuating. Some weeks Gaza dominates headlines. Other weeks it receives little coverage. Yet the daily realities faced by civilians do not change according to media attention. Families still need food. Hospitals still need supplies. Communities still need security. Those needs exist regardless of where global attention happens to be focused. This disconnect between perception and reality often shapes how conflicts are understood internationally. People assume reduced coverage means reduced danger. Sometimes that assumption is correct, sometimes it is not. In Gaza's case, many observers argue the assumption became misleading. The conflict appeared less prominent internationally while remaining highly significant locally. That distinction matters, because misunderstandings about the state of a conflict can influence policy, diplomacy, aid efforts, and public opinion. If people believe a war has ended, urgency declines. Resources may shift elsewhere. Attention may fade. Yet the underlying crisis can remain. That is exactly why humanitarian organizations repeatedly emphasize conditions on the ground rather than political narratives. They focus on measurable realities: access to food, access to healthcare, displacement levels, infrastructure damage, civilian safety. These indicators often reveal a more accurate picture than optimistic political statements alone. None of this means progress is impossible. Negotiations continue, diplomatic efforts continue, humanitarian work continues. Many people remain committed to finding solutions. The desire for stability remains strong across multiple sides of the conflict. But desire alone does not create peace. Sustainable peace requires addressing deeper issues that continue fueling instability. Until those issues are resolved, periods of calm may remain vulnerable to disruption. That is the uncomfortable reality many analysts point to today. The question is not whether people wanted the war to end. Most did. The question is whether the conditions necessary for ending it actually existed. And according to many observers, the answer remains uncertain. As families continue rebuilding damaged lives, humanitarian workers continue delivering aid, and diplomats continue searching for breakthroughs, one fact stands out. The story of Gaza cannot be understood simply through announcements, agreements, or headlines. It must be understood through what happens after those headlines fade. Because while much of the world moved on to newer crises, millions of people remained living with the consequences of a conflict that never truly disappeared. And that is why the war everyone said was over turned out not to be over at all. For the people experiencing it, it never really left.